Joining me now is media writer for the Australian, Sophie Elsworth. Sophie, let's start with a story the Australian ran today, which is really quite disturbing. 1 in 5 Australians are spending almost 50% of their disposable income on energy costs and either rent or mortgage. So it's not leaving much left for everything else. This is according to a new economic report. That's 2 million low-income households who are going to have to cut their spending by some 10% to absorb all these cost increases we're seeing. And it's not going to get any better.
It's certainly not, Rita, and also with all these interest rate rises that really haven't kicked in, the full impact of them haven't been felt. There is a lot of chat that next week there will not be another interest rate rise. It may be the first time after 10 consecutive rises, but I think it's going to only get worse before it gets better for households.
And also for renters, you don't have to have a mortgage because probably the person you're renting the house from has a mortgage, and we've seen the cost of rental properties explode as well. Landlords have got land tax and all sorts of new regulations to abide by. So the state governments aren't making it easy and making it affordable, and we've got hundreds of thousands coming in every year. So that demand is going to only increase. And the construction sector should be booming because of that, but there is enormous pressure. One of the country's biggest builders, Porter Davis Homes, has collapsed, leaving some 1,700 projects in jeopardy. This is just terrible news. I cannot imagine the stress those people would be feeling. One of the most stressful things you can do is to build your own home, and then to have a builder go bust halfway through. And this is one of the big ones. Porter Davis are not some small player. If they are struggling and they're not the first, you really wonder what's happening in that particular industry.
Well, they're not alone, Rita. As we've seen in the media in recent months, it seems to be another builder collapses, another day goes by. There's obviously supply chain issues. There's a shortage of workers, being able to get the actual materials to build the homes. This is having a massive impact. And as a result, this is devastating for not only the building companies that are going bust, but those people who many may have put deposits down in the hope that this is going to be their home. And now where do they stand? It can be a long road fighting these sort of issues if they arise.
And finding people to come in and complete the projects if they've already begun. Let's talk about Dan Andrews. I mentioned at the top of the show that he's on a secretive trip to China this week. Very vague details about what he's actually doing there. But we do know that Cheng Lei's family, who are based in Victoria, have asked Dan Andrews to advocate for the imprisoned journalist. So far, from what I understand, he hasn't said anything publicly, but this is really something important and useful he could be doing there, because what is happening to this journalist is just absolutely appalling.
Well, that's right, Rita. I mean, she's remained in prison for several years with no explanation to why she's behind bars. I've spoken many times to her partner, Nick Coyle. This is incredibly distressing, not only for Cheng Lei, for her family and her 2 children that live here in Melbourne. You would think that the Victorian Premier would be over there advocating for her release, but from what we can see from media reports, this has not been on the table. Now, Penny Wong has spoken out about this numerous times, so I do say that she has done a good job in keeping this on the radar. But this woman was meant to have a trial months ago, last year, and still hasn't. So it's very concerning, and she may be in there, you know, for how long, we don't know.
It is. I just can't believe that we allow this to happen without greater outcry. I mean, I understand Penny Wong has raised it, and you have to be very sensitive in dealing with the Chinese officials because they take offence very quickly. But this is just an appalling human rights abuse happening against one of our own, and I think we should be much stronger in advocating for her. Now, we've got another Aussie who's decided it's, well, perhaps not worth the fight to take on China. It's one of Australia's richest. Andrew Forrest has become a wonderful spokesperson for China. You'll remember some of his antics during the early days of the pandemic, and he's now talking up China's post-pandemic economic growth as one of the bright spots in an uncertain world. Interesting. What do you make of that report?
Rita, why are we pandering to China? I mean, they've had tariffs on us, they've had sanctions. $20 billion of exports have sanctions on them. This is such a worry for Australia's industries. I don't know why Andrew Forrest would be doing this. This is not a good thing. And they were obviously very critical of the nuclear submarines, China. The list goes on. We've got a journalist in prison with no explanation. I don't know why we are behaving like this as a country. We should be standing up for ourselves, and people like Andrew Forrest should be too.
Yes, you would hope so, but sometimes there are other priorities.